Hello, everybody, and welcome to this Unily webinar. Just starting a minute past the hour to give everybody a chance to get that next cup of tea, coffee, get settled in. We know that meetings often run back to back these days, so hopefully everyone will have had a chance to settle in. In terms of today's webinar, we're going to be covering the total economic impact of Unily. So if this is your first Unily webinar, welcome first and foremost, but a little bit of an introduction to the Unily organization. So we are an employee experience platform provider, sometimes referred to as intranets. We are globally distributed. I myself am based out of the UK, but we're serving a globally distributed client base of more than 300 customers and serving about more than 3.5 million users around the world, distributed over more than 100 countries as well. And then finally, just a couple of our most notable security accreditations, which we are very proud of and are obviously very important in the world of enterprise technology. So that's a little bit about Unily as an organization. And if you haven't heard much about the Unily business before, or about the latest in employee experience technology, here's one to be aware of. It's called engagement automation, and Unily is bringing marketing grade automation tools to internal comms. So the ability to orchestrate and plan those communication campaigns across all your internal channels easier than ever before. If that has got the cogs whirring and sounds like it's of interest, well, then there is a webinar where we're going to be covering this and discussing the parallels between the approach of marketers and the technology they use, and the approach of internal communicators and the tools that are becoming available to them to drive higher levels of employee engagement. So if you like today's webinar, which I'm sure you will, there is your next one lined up. Do consider registering for that. But in terms of today's webinar first, great to meet everybody on the webinar today. My name is Matthew Boyd. I'm the product evangelist at Unily. Luckily for you all, I'm not the only presenter today. I'm joined by Rishabh from Forrester. Hi, Rishabh. How are you doing?
Hello, everyone. I'm Matt. My name is Rishabh Dua. I'm a consultant here at Forrester in our Total Economic Impact practice. And here at TEI, we work with technology companies to develop business cases that quantify the costs and benefits have customers have experienced from their technology investments.
Absolutely. Yeah, perfect. It's so good to have you with us. Thank you for agreeing to partner with us on this webinar. Looking forward to hearing more about the Total Economic Impact Report as we go through today's webinar. So to set the scene for what you should be expecting from today's webinar, I'm going to give a little bit of a 5-minute intro into why it is Unily exists, and talk a little bit briefly around the challenges surrounding employee experience platforms and intranet technology. At which point I'm going to hand over to Rishabh, who's going to take us through the Total Economic Impact Report in detail and kind of walk us through what it is and how it helps you to understand return on investment from this kind of technology. And then finally, we will be doing a live Q&A session. So what you'll see in the side panel there is a Q&A window. And in that Q&A window, please do submit any questions you've got over the course of the webinar. You'll be able to upvote each other's questions, and then we will go through them in a priority order set by you, our attendees. So do pop those in the chat. But moving on to that kind of just a little bit of scene setting, when we talk about the modern employee experience, we recognize that there's a broad set of challenges that are experienced and shared by many global organizations. This one, for example, 74% of employees surveyed by Gallup reported that they felt that they were missing out on company news due to poor internal communication, which is a really significant challenge in the field of employee engagement, because internal comms has such a vital role to play in engaging our people, but also keeping them informed for the best possible internal decision making. Further research as well reported that employers may be losing up to 1.8 trillion due to wasted productivity, primarily due to aging infrastructure and outdated technology. And that's just in the US. So we also recognize that many enterprises, there is this kind of outdated technology, which really becomes a blocker for people in doing their best work and getting it done quickly. And that obviously impacts the bottom line for these organizations. And finally, when we talk about the topic of employee engagement, a really interesting stat here from Korn Ferry: 74% of investors stated that the company's ability to win the best talent is now more important than attracting new customers. So, how does your organization differentiate in increasingly competitive markets and ensure its continued success? Well, it's about bringing in the most talented individuals. And these are all kind of challenges that wrap up into this overarching concept of employee engagement and employee experience technology. And it's really these reasons why Unily exists. We exist to kind of provide the technology that helps organizations achieve world-class employee experiences. And that is obviously a journey, and it takes time. And we partner with all of our customers on that journey, helping them to tackle those challenges. But when it comes to measuring the impact of that technology, it can be very, very challenging. When we talk about ROI, many organizations tackle that conversation in different ways depending upon their focus areas. So here are some examples of the way that some Unily customers are tracking ROI, and you'll see that it's varied, usually unique to the organization as they start to think about the different kind of organizational challenges that they're trying to tackle first. So it could be, for example, time saved. It could be time saved actually calculated down to money saved even. It could be about driving engagement with internal communications. But there isn't really a great deal of standardization when it comes to proving ROI. And that is very, very difficult when we have statistics like this from State of the CIO survey, which says that 81% of IT leaders agree that CIOs are under extreme pressure to defend their investments and prove ROI. So if you're looking to make that investment in your digital employee experience, in your intranet, we know that you're feeling the pressure to say, okay, well, this is exactly what it will deliver for our business. And these are the kind of the measurable outcomes. And it's for all of these reasons that Unily has partnered with Forrester on a total economic impact report. So this is the report that we're going to be diving into today and kind of unpacking for everybody. If it's something you'd be interested in reading or following up on or sharing with anyone within your organization, unily.com/feedback at the end of the webinar will be your one-stop shop to tell us how we did, but also download a copy. So with all of that said, I'm going to hand over to our guest speaker, Rishabh, who's going to take us through it. Over to you.
All right. Thank you very much, Matthew. I appreciate it. Let's move forward onto this presentation. Thank you, everyone, for paying attention. So the agenda for today is to start with explaining TEI as a methodology. Then we'll review the executive summary of the study before moving to the key highlights. Then I'll share the journeys that the customers went through. And finally, we'll go through the financial metrics and study results. I won't be able to go into every detail of the analysis here. So if you're interested in learning more, as mentioned, please take a look at the full study. So let's start with how the TEI methodology works. So what is TEI? TEI is a methodology that we use here at Forrester to articulate and justify the value investment of a technology. Forrester surveyed IT decision makers and asked them if they see a value in developing a business case for technology investments. And over 90% agreed that it was important. So the next question then becomes, why TEI? Traditionally, most organizations did a total cost of ownership to help articulate the value of only costs and cost savings. Others did return on investment to incorporate the business impact of technology investments, including the benefits. But TEI takes it a few steps further by incorporating a couple other components. It is a proven, consistent, repeatable methodology to justify technology investments. So let's talk a little bit about what these four elements are. First, benefits. So these are the added revenue and business benefits an organization experiences. Costs, these are essentially the upfront and ongoing costs of adopting a technology. Flexibility. Here at Forrester, we define that as what helps to incorporate the strategic value of future investments enabled by the original one. And then risk. Across all three variables that I just mentioned, we adjust for the riskiness and uncertainty of an investment. Now, let's talk a little bit about the project approach. So the TEI approach is a multi-step process. It starts with what we call due diligence. So during this phase, we speak to both our internal subject matter experts here at Forrester and then to internal stakeholders at the firm so that we better understand the technology. Now, after this due diligence phase, we speak to actual customers who are actually using Unily. This phase is the highlight of the TEI methodology. So what benefits have customers seen and why did they decide that Unily in particular was best for them? So we get a strong understanding of the customer journey and the results of their investment decision. Now, the key takeaway here is we're not theorizing about the benefits companies see from Unily. We talk to real customers about their real deployments and the real benefits they've actually experienced. Now, in order to create the financial analysis of this case study, what we do is we move on to creating a composite organization. So we aggregate all the information we collected during the interviews and shape it into a representative organization that you can compare to your own company. Finally, we write the case study itself. We include not only a financial model, but all the context and customer journeys behind the numbers. So this is a quotation from a customer, the head of a digital communications for a staffing employment firm that noted how Unily improved the employee working experience. I thought it was a very good encapsulation of what they were looking for and what it did. So they said one of the biggest things that we tried to do with our employees is to bring all of them together in one place so they could see beyond their sphere of work and get them thinking about the bigger picture, to work together, to create solutions across businesses and brands, and ultimately serve our customers better. Now, what this means is here's the 3-year impact. So this is where Unily comes into the picture. Our TEI analysis determined a 3-year impact for investing in Unily to be a return on investment of 385%, which equates to more than 9 million in benefits and a net present value of more than 7 million once we do our analysis. Now, let's jump into getting more details in what we heard from current customers and who they were. So, who did we interview? For this study, we interviewed 4 customers across a variety of industries, from healthcare to staffing and employment services to energy and insurance. And finally, within these organizations, we spoke to 5 decision makers with roles ranging from a senior director of a people experiences team to, as mentioned, a head of digital communications, to a support and services delivery manager, to an applications analyst, and finally to a manager of a corporate communications group. So we spoke to a variety of folks, and this really helps inform the journey that we hear. Now, for the interviewed customers, they had a set of key challenges that we heard that that drove them to make their investment with Unily. And let me talk through each of these in a little bit more detail here. So the first was inefficient company-wide communication. So contributors could not easily communicate news and updates company-wide. It was time-consuming for content contributors to post across sites and difficult for employees to stay up to date. The second was just antiquated and customized legacy intranet sites. So interviewees had multiple sites across the enterprise. Sites were slow, hard to navigate, time consuming to maintain, and rarely updated. And finally, inconsistency across sites, right? There was a lack of brand consistency. So site admins would create sites tailored to that office or department or that group. Now, what these organizations and the investment objective for these customers was really to see a solution that could do a couple of different things. Could consolidate information across sites, offer a consistent visuals, right, and a user-friendly experience interface and experience that would bring ownership and governance to the solution. So now let's talk about how we took all this information and what we did to put it all together. So this is a composite organization. So the results of our study are based off what we call this composite, which is a representative organization that is built from an aggregation of data points from the interviewed customers. So in this case, our composite is a global organization that works across both B2B and B2C that has $20 billion in revenue and has 25,000 employees. Now, this organization's focus is on consolidating its multiple intranet sites, creating a centralized place for employees to find and share information with an easy-to-use interface, and it wants to create more ownership and brand coherence within the intranet ecosystem and the employee experience.
Rishabh, sorry. Yeah, that's really interesting. And I just wanted to hop in there, as you could probably tell by me coming back on camera. I've just had a little question because I know that our attendees today probably work across various different industry verticals. And indeed,
Mm.
the organizations and Unily customers that you interviewed come from different industry verticals too. I just wanted to ask you, when it comes to the composite organization, do you think it can be applied equally across different verticals? As we know, for example, that certain verticals will have, say, unique employee segments, such as frontline workers.
Of course, a fantastic question. So the composite is meant to be representative of the most typical customer journey, and at its core, with its focus on looking at all types of workers, right, from
Mm.
desktop workers, knowledge workers to frontline workers, and it's a device that we use to make this research applicable to any reader looking to really envision their organizations on this journey. So it'll look at all verticals, all types of customers, and it's meant to be that representative of just any type of firm that we tried to put together here. And thus, it is a global organization, which is working across everything. So we wanted to make sure it was uh, most typical of a customer journey.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much for that clarification.
Excellent. All right, moving on. So what we heard. So based on this composite organization, we modeled the benefits that the organizations will receive from their Unily investment. Now, you can see that the composite realized the benefits over 3 years: an increased efficiency for content production, increased productivity for knowledge workers, increased efficiency for IT teams, time savings for new intranet portal development, and cost savings from technology consolidation. Now, let's dig into each of these benefits in more detail. First, increased efficiency for content production. Now, interviewed organizations noted that content producers used to spend substantial time navigating different intranet sites to create content that was up to date and try to ensure the accuracy of new and existing content. And with Unily, fewer people needed to research, post, and review content, and employees who previously worked on content production saved time and were able to attend to other tasks. Specifically, with this model, content contributors saved 15% of time on content production. And for this composite organization, with 200 content contributors for this composite, this equates to a 3-year present value of around 4.8 million. And as you can see, one of the managers said, the communications team is hugely satisfied with Unity and being able to publish news and having it read and delivered to the entire company, which we think was a fantastic way of showcasing what this meant. Now, the next benefit is savings from more improved productivity for knowledge workers. So interviewed customers stated that information was dispersed across separate portals and information was not current or easily accessible. Now, with Unily, knowledge workers reduced the time they spent searching for information and trying to connect with colleagues. And with Unily, there were improvements in search, navigation, and content accessibility. And for knowledge workers, there was a productivity gain of 50% for the time they spent for doing all this work. A support and service delivery manager actually noted that Unily enabled people to be more self-sufficient. They know they can go to the internet, search for it, and likely find it. Whereas before, they may not even have bothered searching any environment, given the difficulty of finding all this information. Now, for this composite organization, this equates to a 3-year present value benefit of around 2.6 million. Now, the next benefit here will be increased efficiency for the IT team. Now, in this situation, and what we're trying to get to here is interviewed customers noted that with Unily's technical support in maintaining the platform, fewer members of the IT team needed to maintain the intranet, enable them to work on other tasks and focus on resolving technical issues or making improvements where needed. And for this composite organization, with approximately 5% of the IT team working on an intranet solution, annually this equates to a 3-year present value benefit of around 546,000. Now, the fourth benefit that we'll talk about is the new intranet portal development. So, building a new portal with legacy systems in place was time consuming for developers and web designers on the IT team. It was just required a lot of effort, and implementation with Unily decreased the time to build and deploy a new site. So for this composite organization, we said there were around 8 new sites that were created each year, and 3 developers were required to build and deploy. With Unily in place, developers saved 480 hours per portal. Now, a manager for an energy firm actually noted that previously we were looking at months to deploy, and with Unily, you're looking at just a couple of days. Definitely a major increase in efficiency here. So for the composite organization, this equates to a 3-year present value benefit of around 620K. So next, we'll talk about the technology savings and what that meant for an organization. So with Unily's set of connected tools, interviewees could sunset third-party applications, consolidate legacy sites, and quickly develop new sites. So what that meant was interviewees could reduce the amount of software and licenses that were required to develop and maintain legacy intranet solutions following the implementation of Unily. And actually, one point that I thought was really interesting was a corporate communications group manager from an insurance firm noted Unily helped make the amount of tools we had visible. So we were able to consolidate and integrate. I think oftentimes one thing that comes through all this is just visibility, and you just didn't have an idea of what you're using where. So I thought that was a very good encapsulation to be able to showcase what you could do with technology savings. And an applications analyst actually mentioned that since we were able to use the broadcast functionality with the Unily platform, they just didn't need to add an additional analytical tool in place. So you're able to also just avoid adding new elements to your environment. Now, what this means is these are all the quantified elements of the study. But in addition to these benefits, interviewees also talked about other impactful benefits that were not quantified. And these are very important to understand because it really tells a greater story. So let's talk about each of these in a little bit more detail as we go through. So first was improved employee engagement with company communications. So interviews here noted that there's an increase in favorability through higher net promoter score. This is an NPS score that they use to track and understand what is happening within a firm. And engagement following the implementation just went much higher. The second element here that really came through was improved governance. So interviews noted that prior, there's just a lack of ownership around the internet due to all these multiple sites dispersed across the organization. Nobody knew who was dealing with what. And after implementation, there's this greater brand adherence. There's enhanced employee trust in the internet content and really just more centralized ownership. When you had this one location where you could go to, no one's creating different types of sites. You had it all in one spot. So you could really track down who owns what. And what this really also meant was you had improved collaboration. So with this improved solution, there's improved collaboration across departments, teams, even geographic regions, right? Your offices are dispersed across the globe. And what that means is, in order to understand if you need to talk to somebody in a different office, then who do you contact? How do you do this? And now they're able to really put this all together. And this resulted in just more knowledge sharing. You could talk to somebody in another group and say, hey, I need some help with this topic. What do I do? And finally, what this really also meant was interviews also noted that the onboarding experience was so much easier, right? You could go in, look at everything that you need to know when you join a company right away. And so they saw greater intranet usages because now you could onboard somebody faster. You could do it with a more efficient fashion than before trying to go across all these various sites. So it across all these elements, we really saw these benefits that could not be quantified. But if you want to read more about these, you can definitely read about them in the study.
Yeah, Rishabh, this is a real area of interest for me because obviously I know that the total economic impact report very much focuses on the elements of the new technology that can be kind of nailed down and kind of be presented in a very kind of analytical fashion. But obviously there are these kind of unquantifiable benefits, the benefits that we kind of perceive and in some cases can kind of attempt to measure and document, but it can be a lot more difficult to get to the nitty gritty of this and kind of prove some of these scenarios. How important do you think it is to kind of be monitoring and kind of trying to track these kind of benefits alongside looking at the big picture kind of economic impact elements that you've shared with us today?
Certainly. So one of the things that comes through is when we talk to customers, we really try to ask them as much as we can to really get a holistic picture. So, in addition to the quantified benefits, interviews also provided these insights into these other impactful areas, but they couldn't quantify, right? They couldn't say what is the actual change in what this was. But it's important to note that these are benefits beyond just the ROI, right? These benefits help tell a greater story beyond just the numbers. So these are really powerful measures of success and show the holistic value of Unily, right? You have the ROI, you have these quantified numbers, but you get a grander sense of what this can do and what other elements you can start to benchmark or think through when you're looking at this. And additionally, you can read about in the study actually about flexibility, which we,
Mm.
as I mentioned, incorporate as a way to look at additional use cases or even future business opportunities. So not just, these elements that you can think about, there's also additional points that as you look forward, you can also start to see additional elements with this flexibility.
Yeah, makes perfect sense, and I think the reason for the question, especially, is because we kind of, when we engage with new organizations, we're often encouraging them to try and when they think about the big picture goals they're trying to achieve, and let's say they want to improve the governance of the intranet, we often at the outset of any engagement encourage them to try and benchmark in some kind of way where they are now, which speaks to the unquantifiable nature. It's very hard after you've already dismantled your previous intranet to say, well, it was governed really badly before, but what can you kind of attribute to that, and how can you kind of measure it, is something that we really kind of try to help customers plan out in advance of a project, so they can, as you say, build a really big picture view of it all alongside the kind of elements that you've already covered. So thank you for kind of talking us through some of those unquantifiable benefits and for pointing out there's more detail in the report too.
Of course, and I'll just quickly add, right? I think one element, for example, is this net promoter score, right? You can start to see and think through that if you were looking at it beforehand and you know that this is something you can start to look at, you can actually quantify some of this maybe down the line. You can put some more thought into this and put some additional benchmarking around this. But all these other elements are just good to start thinking about and seeing, right? What is the time it took to onboard an employee before you actually had this in place, and now what can you gain? So I think all these elements really come through, but you can read more about these definitely, as you said, in the study. So I think it really, as I said, just adds this holistic value that helps kind of think through when you're looking forward into what you want to see next. So let's move on to where we see things. So, included in the study was also an in-depth discussion of costs. So, we identified and quantified two cost components for the composite organization based on our conversations with customers. So, first was subscription fees and the implementation and maintenance, which features the initial implementation effort and then the ongoing maintenance effort by employees for the solution. So this equated to a 3-year present value of approximately 1.8 million. And as you can tell from the return on investment and the way this shows, the break even point actually for this investment was less than a year. So we really found that over the course of 3 years, you see this return on investment of 385%. And with the analysis of present value in today's dollars, you get to around 7.2 million in benefits. So we really found that there was a lot to gain from a solution as such. Now, finally, before we end, I'll just quickly say a quick disclosure. So Unily commissioned Forrester Consulting to conduct a study before examining the total economic impact of Unily. So the interviewed customers were also provided by Unily, and we developed the study with data collected from the customers interviewed. As I mentioned, right, that's where we get this information from. Forrester does not endorse Unily or its products, but it is a independent third party with editorial rights on this study. So hopefully, this gave you a good look at the key insights that you can find from the entire TEI study. And if you're interested in learning more about the actual math or dig deeper into the assumptions, the full study goes into all that detail, along with the discussion of the methodology that I previewed earlier. So thank you for your attention and time.
Thank you very much, Rishabh, for taking us through all of that. That's been really insightful, and I had just a few points that I wanted to pick up with yourself as we kind of move into the Q&A section. So just going to drop those slides for the time being. So for anybody else, who's on today's webinar who has questions, please do start popping those into the Q&A. This is your chance to ask Rishabh or myself anything that you'd be interested to know about, ROI and the total economic impact report for the Unily platform. But before I start kind of having a look at the questions that have been posed, I guess there's a couple of questions that I wanted to kind of ask. One was actually around the consolidation of technology. As employee experience platforms grow and continue to add new capabilities, and there's already cost savings associated with the current tool set, do you think that the total economic impact of a solution like Unily will continue to grow as they cover more ground and more point solutions are merged into this one central platform?
Yeah, so when we looked at what customers said according to what they were able to do once they were able to measure whatever they could have, and as we mentioned, right, some of these things can be a little bit more difficult, but
Mhm.
uh, the services and elements that they could not at the moment there were some elements they said, okay, we're right now we have this, but we're in the future going to be able to consolidate. We
Mm,
are going to be taking this out because we can start using more elements. And actually one of the elements that came through from customers that was quite interesting was, with Unily you have this ideation element where
mm,
you keep adding new elements.
mm,
And the interviewees were so impressed with this idea that you can keep incorporating new elements so that going forward, right? If you keep adding these new elements, you no longer need some of these endpoint solutions. So
mm.
I think, to add to your point, as you move forward, you might be able to consolidate more and more, but the model as it stands is just saying what you were able to see from the point that you initially had done. But yes,
Yeah.
definitely moving forward, as you're able to add more elements to Unily and see where you can use more functionality, uh,
Mm.
definitely can consolidate more as you move forward.
Yeah, because it's interesting as well that some of the, well, I guess that element specifically speaks to the evergreen nature of the platform, the fact that we have an evolving roadmap where new features are brought out over time. And I guess that in of itself is kind of tied to the nature of the technology software as a service. But it was really interesting how when we kind of look at the total economic impact report, there were various different quantifiable benefits from a software as a service model, particularly around essentially having a partner take care of all the technical infrastructure, the
Hmm.
support pieces. And there's kind of a less tangible element there, which is that by having a trusted partner who can deal with a lot of that, maybe you're reducing the stress of having to
Right.
manage that on your internal support teams. So
No.
those kind of software as a service elements were really interesting. That in combination with the developer skill set is kind of and the developer point especially is almost like uh you know a double win really, because if you've got internal developer resources, then they're not necessarily building fundamental employee experience features
Right.
because a platform like Unity already delivers them. But through our extensibility framework, they can turn their attention to extending what Unity already offers or building for bespoke requirements. So you're actually able to free up their time from the basics, refocus them maybe on additional potential development opportunities for the more nuanced or bespoke elements that you might need for your business, which is another interesting side of that. Um, and then just another question that I just wanted to ask as well, just to kind of
Hmm.
share some insights. Can you describe in a little bit more detail what the customer interview process was like? Just in terms of the process, would be great to share that.
Right, for sure. So as I talked about initially, right, we do initial due diligence phase where we speak to our internal analysts, and then we speak to internal stakeholders. So after
Mm,
we do this due diligence phase and make sure we understand, we craft an interview guide to make sure we are asking the right questions. And we work with the client, Unily yourself, to source the customers and make sure that they can provide us an impactful story, right? Provide some of those quantifiable benefits, but also speak to that holistic journey and some of those more unquantified things as well. So
mm,
the interviews themselves are an hour long, and the client does not attend. And we interview the customers to really hear their journeys with their technology, and as I said, right, learn about the benefits, learn about the costs with their investment, and be able to pull together information across all four. In this case, we did 4 interviews, so be able to aggregate and take all that to develop that composite. So the interview process is very much put together in a way to make sure we get a story that is really impactful.
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's really interesting. And I mean, um, this is another kind of interesting tidbit as well, because I mean, I know that many of these clients will have kind of analytics where they're tracking kind of site performance. Is that kind of something that is shared during that process? A client's able to kind of talk to you about, the analytics that they're tracking on the platform, aside from the traditional kind of TEI elements, they talk to kind of news coverage or engagement levels, things like that, or
Yeah, so I think, as I mentioned, right, we when we talk to these customers, we try to understand, right, how are they using the solution?
Mm,
What is the premise for them going through and trying to uh, look at what metrics they have. So, for example, for usage rate, right, that was one of the elements where they may not have had as much data, but they could talk to the fact that we're seeing more people use this. We're seeing higher engagement levels. And we couldn't quantify it, but there was definitely a lot of information that said we're using these functionality, right?
mm,
One customer actually mentioned, right, they're using the broadcast functionality to get
mm,
information across to the entire organization that they couldn't have before because they just didn't have that. They're seeing that with onboarding, as I mentioned, you're having new people come on board and just be able to download information so much faster, and be able to really kind of understand where these use cases are. So you're
mm.
seeing elements like that where customers really spoke to this idea of usage and how they're seeing, uh, you know, not the quantified metrics, but really just pure usage and what they're gaining from it.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense, actually. It's good to kind of shed some light on the process because it's, Forrester working directly with these organizations. So it's good to hear the good to hear the outcomes and be able to share them in formats like this. So what I'll do now is just have a look because I think we do have a few questions in here. Okay, cool. Let's have a little look. So, um, first question that's come through, based upon the composite organization, what would be the typical cost for the business as it migrates old content across from its legacy sites? Rishabh, I'm not sure if migration costs was something that Forrester specifically explored.
Right. For this composite organization, that was not an element that we specifically looked at.
Mm,
For the information that we collected from customers and what they were able to tell us, it was more just services and license fees that
mhm.
from legacy solutions, but there wasn't a lot of information specifically on that. But that could be an element that comes through. However, we did not hear that during the interview process at the moment.
Okay. I think interestingly, and I can give as an ex intranet consultant, I could probably share a few insights on that specific point around content migration, because I know that when many organizations look at the intranet or employee experience platform kind of migration process, it can be very alluring to think of it as a lift and shift process whereby you take everything you've got right now, but you're just going to make it look way cooler and like it's going to be way more engaging and easier to find. But in many cases, what we find actually is that there is a lot of material, a lot of content that is proposed for migration that actually isn't really required. And recently we prepared a kind of a Moscow matrix kind of content planning tool, which can help organizations with planning for content migration as part of their, you know, uh, reinvigoration of their digital employee experience. So we would always start from a point of don't think about it as a massive migration project. Instead, start by thinking about what are the bits that you must have in your new solution. And what you find is that if there are things that are missing, people quickly ask for them, and you have an opportunity to bring them over. But we certainly wouldn't recommend wholesale migration from previous technologies, especially if challenges, as pointed out by Rishabh, like you face challenges around, say, intranet governance. Then probably what you're going to find is there's lots of dusty old content ferreted away across your existing employee experience platform, which maybe isn't going to add as much value in a straight migration effort. So if you're interested in more about kind of the topic of migration as well, I'm pretty sure we have some good content covering that topic on our website, but we can obviously follow up as needed. Another interesting question, while talking about the technology consolidation piece, what kind of tech tools can you consolidate with Unily? Rishabh, you mentioned that the customers you interviewed specifically mentioned the broadcast center. Was there anything else that was kind of drawn out specifically, or was that the main one, do you think?
So, when we spoke to them, the customers really said that they just use a variety of tools for communication. There wasn't, like a number of third-party solutions that supported the internet. So, what we tried to do was understand what elements they could, it could be licenses. For example, one of the things that came through was across all the platforms, you had licenses that they could sunset.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was an element that they could put through, right?
Mm-hmm.
It could be, for example, a service that you went to customize different sites, right? A customization service that they were using to be able to put together a site beforehand that you couldn't before. And we definitely thought that there was also this element of, maybe to develop and deploy from an external vendor, for example. What you would save from that. So when we looked at the technology savings, it was these licenses and services that really came together as something that they were able to not do and consolidate. But in terms of purely third-party solutions or elements, we didn't hear as much specifics on that for types of tools. It was more around these services and licensing elements.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think that the broadcast center is probably one that kind of stands out in my mind, and makes sense that that would be one that's kind of mentioned, because email platforms for kind of internal comms do exist as kind of point solutions. The challenge, of course, alongside, say, a standalone intranet solution is, and this speaks to the challenge you mentioned around time taken to curate and create content, is that in your intranet, you're publishing internal comms, and then you're copying and pasting, say, abstracts, moving images between two systems just to send an email broadcast that summarizes it, or an email basically that just says, hey, these are the latest internal comms articles for you this week. You're kind of duplicating that effort in a point solution just to send an email. So I can understand why the email functionality specifically would be an area that would come up. I think from my experience, another one that comes up from time to time anecdotally in conversations that I have with customers would probably be around the frontline worker and mobile app experience. I know that some organizations try to cater for frontline workers independently from their, say, traditional knowledge workers. And I understand in the TEI, as we covered earlier, that the composite organization encapsulates all, audiences within an organization. But from a technology perspective, sometimes there can be this desire within the organization to create really high quality mobile experiences for frontline workers, knowing that they're not going to use a laptop.
Right.
But I think that would probably be another area where there are potential cost savings to be made for some organizations, because Unily offers a very robust frontline worker and mobile experience as part of the standard, platform. So it kind of, again, eliminates the need for, say, point frontline worker solutions, which are often focused almost exclusively on internal comms, and leads you down the same route that we talked about before as a massive cost benefit, which is you're duplicating content. You've got a big story about company strategy and you're posting it once to the intranet, copying it again into the frontline worker mobile app, then again into your email tool for the weekly roundup, and the duplication can be endless. So I think that's probably another one that comes up a lot from my conversations with customers, at least. So yeah, an interesting one. I actually had another question of of my own, and I want to hog all the time. So if anybody has other questions, please do pop them in the chat. But one of the things you mentioned was risk adjustment
Hmm.
for the total economic impact, and I was wondering if you could basically expand on that risk adjustment a little bit and what that means in terms of the kind of total calculations.
Certainly. So, as I mentioned, during one of the elements that we look at is risk. And so, what we do is to account for how benefits can vary due to uncertainty and variance among the benefit categories, we adjust the benefits to a risk adjusted total present value. And this
Mm,
is really in an effort to present a reasonable, achievable, credible benefit and ROI total. So, what these risk adjusted benefits still produce a risk adjusted ROI, but it's a very compelling business case because it
mm,
raises the confidence that investment is likely to succeed because we've taken some of these things into account. The risks have been taken into consideration and quantified. So the risk adjusted numbers should be taken as this very realistic expectation for an investment. Right? What are the
mm,
factors? So for example, for this study, we looked at risks that included, let's say, the number of users, right? And how big is your IT team, right? The development teams, how many intranet sites or portals did you have? How many are you thinking of developing in a year? So we
mm,
try to look at elements like that to really incorporate this into the risk-adjusted total, which again is there to provide a more compelling business case that really
mm.
gives you that confidence to say this is reasonable, credible, and it really makes sense for this benefit.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense, and I guess that's really important because you want to set aspirational goals, but of course you want to be kind of smart with your objectives. They have to be achievable ultimately.
Right.
So that makes a lot of sense. I think it's good to kind of share that context with the attendees. Um, and then I just wanted to loop back around on a couple of points actually in questions that we'd already answered. One would just be on the question of migration. I know we kind of talked a little about this already, but I guess there's probably another unquantifiable benefit in say the partnership with an employee experience platform provider as opposed to say working internally solely on projects like this, for example, if we were to draw a comparison line. And that would be that the services that are provided and have been will be documented costs in say the total economic impact report includes working with specialist employee experience consultants within the Unily business. So when it comes to migration, the really good thing to know is that we can provide advice and guidance which help you to avoid pitfalls, and for example give you the kind of best practice to save you time and effort before you go too far down a path which may not net out in the best possible result for your organization. And the other point I wanted to loop back on as well was in terms of consolidation of technology, and we talked about the Unity roadmap being a significant influencer of the value of consolidation. As we add more functionality to the Unity platform, it gives more opportunity to do away with point solutions and wrap that under a
Yeah.
single, more manageable suite of tools housed in one platform. And I mentioned at the start engagement automation. It should have popped into my head straight away, really, but since I talked about it as a next potential webinar for people, but that's another good example. Workflow, employee onboarding workflow capabilities, for example, is another point solution that organizations often look to. With engagement automation, we look to, again, tackle use cases like that and very much tie it into your core intranet experience. How do you go on the intranet homepage on day one of joining an organization and get that unquantifiable benefit of feeling like it's a true digital home for your culture and feel connected to people from day one? So that kind of onboarding experience and that kind of nurturing of employee engagement is all encapsulated under that new capability, engagement automation. So just another little shameless plug for my next webinar. Hopefully I'll convert some of you to join me for that one as well. So I can see we've used up quite a lot of our time today already, but it looks like we've also managed to cover most, if not everyone's questions, which is fantastic. So before everyone departs, so just a few kind of closing remarks from myself. first and foremost, I'd like to thank you, Rishabh, for joining us today. It's been a pleasure, both working with you in preparation for this webinar and hearing you kind of unpack the economic impact report today. So thank you for joining us again. And thank you to all our attendees for choosing to join us as well. If you can, unily.com/feedback. We look to run webinars that are really useful to you as employee experience experts and internal communicators alike. So please share what you thought of today's webinar so that we can constantly look to improve. And again, at that same link, you'll be able to download your copy of Forrester's Total Economic Impact Report covering the Unily platform. And I think with that said, we can bring today's webinar to a close. Rishabh, thank you. Everybody else, thank you for joining us. We'll see you on the next one.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.